Here, make knock it off at your Pittsburgh result
is no
stop.
result.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Analysis with Ro. I'm your host, Ro, giving you the latest in everything media, or everything that I seem to be interested in. And today, we're pretty much going to be continuing on with our Hisoka analysis episode series. We're finishing out with Unit 1, and we're going to continue today with the episode for conduct disorder, and pretty much what conduct disorder is, and we'll establish that a bit more later on throughout this podcast, is that it's the childhood version of ASPD, which is essentially one of the mental illnesses that I theorize his character to have. So we're going to be discussing that and further analyzing how it kind of started developing from childhood and seeing how that essentially affects his character. So we're going to go through all of that and so much more in this episode. I do hope that you guys enjoy. I know it's been a long time since you've heard my voice. Hopefully that won't happen again or any more delays. But if it does, just know that you can always check out the old episodes regardless and support the channel. But anyways, let's get on right into it with defining what conduct disorder even is, because before I even explain everything that applies to this character, you gotta know what the heck I'm talking about. So let's establish that before we get into anything else. Before we understand anything else about this episode, we gotta understand what conduct disorder even is in the first place. Let's go on ahead and establish that definition, shall we? Now, conduct disorder, otherwise known as CD, is a mental health condition that impacts children and adolescents. It's characterized by a persistent pattern of aggressive behaviors and actions that threaten the well-being of others. Children with this disorder commonly violate rules and societal norms. This disorder is part of a broader spectrum of disruptive behavioral disorders, which may also encompass oppositional defiant disorder, otherwise known as ODD, and in some instances, ODD can progress into conduct disorder. For this particular character, I do not think that is the case. However, that tends to be the case for other kids, so that's just something to keep in mind. Now that you know what it is, let's also talk about a couple of other things. So a couple of other basics is that this disorder, along with many other mental disorders, has a thing called comorbidity. And if you talked about comorbidities before, or if you heard me talk about comorbidities before, you might be a bit confused on what that word is. It basically means combination in the mental illness world. So when we say the term comorbidity, it pretty much means the combination of. So let's just all have that in our brains to put our thinking caps on. So comorbidity equals combination of. So the possible combination, so in other words, other mental illnesses that could encompass conduct disorder as well, is the following. Depression. I do think this character has it. I'm going to explain it way later. It does not appear until late teenhood, adulthood. I'm going to explain it. Just keep that comorbidity in mind. We also have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This one we kind of already explained, as to how it combines a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that combination today. We've kind of already preluded and hinted that this is also a comorbidity that this particular character has. And then learning disorders of any other kind. There are occasions of, besides like ADHD, there's a couple other learning disabilities and disorders where conduct disorder will also encompass. Now that you pretty much know like the main ones, there's a couple of others, but those are the main three categories of comorbidities and where they would lie. We're also going to discuss real quickly the subtle difference between ASPD and conduct disorder. So again, before we establish anything else, we kind of got to understand what is the slight difference. I will say there's not much, and we're going to talk about that right about now. So, a personality disorder is a mental health condition characterized by persistent patterns of thought, behavior, mood, and interpersonal relationships that therefore interfere with normal functioning. Most personality disorders typically manifest during the teenage years, coinciding with the development and maturation of an individual's personality, and they generally are diagnosed after the age of 18. So pretty much what is going on is that ASPD is a personality disorder. So we got to establish what a personality disorder is, because that's what ASPD is. That's the category. It's in different categories, and there is a slight good reason why children don't really have personality disorders. You can't really call, for example, a child a narcissist. It's not really that possible. They can't be diagnosed with NPD. There's a different category for that. I don't know if NPD has these special rules, but I know for ASPD, it has the special rules in which we're going to talk about. But in general, with personality disorders, you do not get a diagnosis for that until you're 18. It is one of the few mental illnesses that have special rules around it. So any mental illness that's categorized as a personality disorder can't get diagnosed till you're 18. There's special rules around it. There's a pretty good reason why. The main thing is because they're waiting for the brain to have fuller development. Certain behaviors that children have can be confused for narcissistic, but that's only because they're still developing their skills of empathy. It's not all the way there yet anyway. So that's why they tend to do that, to not cause any confusion for what might be seen as normal childhood development. So because of that, they tend to not diagnose kids with personality disorders yet. However, they do look for early signs for what could potentially get worse without treatment. And then it turns into a personality disorder if the same traits and symptoms keep appearing even throughout adulthood. Now that we have that established, most personality disorders also typically manifest during the teenage years. So it starts really becoming a problem once you hit like teenage years. I would go as far as to say late teenhood. So ages 16 to 18, that's really when they start looking for, okay, this might be a permanent thing. So that's when those types of things and observations start to really become more apparent. And this coincides with the development and maturation of an individual's personality, and then they're generally officially diagnosed after the age of 18. So that's how all of that typically goes. However, with antisocial personality disorder, otherwise known as ASPD, again, we have that slight exception. So, as approximately as 80% of individuals with the disorder present symptoms by the age of 11. So, the reason why it's an exception is because normally, if you don't really see this diagnosis like at adulthood only, sometimes it's adulthood only, but a lot of the times it actually starts developing from childhood. And that's why conduct disorder is kind of observed with more of a sharp eye, because a lot of these kids who tend to have either conduct, sometimes ODD, but I'll be honest, a lot of times it's conduct, they tend to end up developing ASPD if left untreated. Now, again, this is not the case for everybody with conduct disorder. Not all of them develop ASPD, especially if they have treatment throughout childhood. But as we can clearly see with this character in particular, that does not happen, right? He did not get proper treatment at all. So, he ended up developing ASPD. There we go. But yeah, conduct disorder is officially recognized, or often recognized, I should say, as an early indication of ASPD. We're going to talk more about that particular relationship and how, conduct disorder is kind of like the baby ASPD. We'll get more into that when we get into teenhood. So Unit 2, we're going to continue on with this conduct disorder conversation, because I do think for this particular character, it starts developing really in his teenhood. He has what is considered adolescent onset. We'll talk more about that later. But because of that, a lot of the conversation around his particular conduct is going to be in Unit 2. This is more like an introduction. So now that you know everything about the basics of conduct and how it kind of operates and runs, the last thing for this particular section before we move on to the fun stuff is you got to understand what, or rather who, does conduct disorder affect, right? It's like, who is the population that gets the most affected? It's like, all right, people have this disorder, people are affected. Let's see who's more likely to have it, right? Let's look into the whole statistics of it all before we get into the fun, juicy stuff. So, conduct disorder is a psychiatric condition that impacts children and adolescents. The onset of the disorder can occur prior to the age of 10 or during adolescence. For this particular character, we're going to be observing adolescent onset. So that's onset 2. And also, you got to understand this, right? With adolescent and childhood. With childhood, again, that's more so like ODD, and then it develops into conduct disorder. That's more so where that's prevalent. For us, that's not the case. I haven't seen any observations or clear symptoms starting at like early childhood. For me, I really do think that this particular character, from what I can see, is started around the point, it's like from his mother dying, the symptoms were like mild, and then it got upward to the point of it being severe once it hit like teenhood. So that's really where everything kind of went like severe. We're going to talk more about like the map in the second portion of this episode, but just know there's a certain trajectory as to why I'm sticking to it being adolescent rather than starting from childhood. Like a lot of other people have theorized, or rather have assumed, I don't think it started when he was like a young thing, ages 0 to, I want to say 10. Honestly, ages 0 to 10, nothing really happened. I would argue that he was a fairly normal kid, with the exceptions that we talked about way earlier throughout this analysis series. With those exceptions aside, it's like, we're dealing with a fairly normal kid, and then trauma started to occur. And sometimes this happens with ASPD. You could have the genetics for it or the presets for it, but it's not fully activated kind of unless you're traumatized. That's the best way I could say it. It's like you have this bottle, let's say you have this bottle of like Coke, for example, right? It's like a science experiment, and you put Mentos in the Coke and you shake it and kind of wait for it to explode. Think of the trauma as like the Mentos and the shaking, right? Nothing's really going to happen to the Coke if it's just normal Coke. It's like it's a normal carbon, the way that it's supposed to be, the carbonization is normal. And then if you add something to kind of like activate the process that you need required to pretty much cause that explosion, then it's going to have that reaction. Think of that same way with like a human brain and with trauma. For some people, ASPD/conduct disorder, it doesn't start really activating fully until the brain is like traumatized. That's not always the case, but sometimes it is trauma induced. So it's also important to take trauma into consideration of a factor. So for this particular character, I do think that's most likely what's going on here. Now, because of all of that, let's also talk about who does it affect. Going back to the main theme, conduct disorder is a psychiatric condition, right? It impacts as children and adolescents. The onset is either before the age of 10 or during adolescence. So pretty much before ages 10, but not when you're an infant. Doesn't make sense. So I would say ages 3-4 years old all the way up to ages 17, maybe 18, because for some diagnoses they include 18 as still a part of childhood, which I think is fair. I do think the 18-year-old brain is still underdeveloped, so right on for the people who tend to do that. Either 17 or 18, depending on which book you're reading. That's when they really tend to look for signs for this particular disorder. Now, epidemiologically speaking, studies also indicate that the prevalence of conduct disorder is notably higher in males compared to females. What that pretty much means is that for conduct disorder, it tends to have a higher chance to develop in a little boy than a little girl. That isn't to say that little girls don't have it. There are cases in which you do have little girl children or female children that end up developing this disorder. However, it's just a lot more rare. Part of it could be socialization. Part of it could be some other factors that might have to do with the whole XY chromosome thing. I haven't gotten down into the full science of that. Again, we're just discussing the basics today, but pretty much you're more likely to bump into a child who is a boy that has conduct disorder rather than a girl. Again, that doesn't mean it's impossible for a girl to end up having this disorder. It's just that the chances are a lot lower for reasons in which I'll research later. But for now, just know that that's what's shaking. That's what's happening. So the average age of onset for males is typically between 10 and 12. Whereas for females, it tends to be 14 and 16. However, again, this is just general stats. For this particular character, there are cases of children who are of the male category. They end up developing it when they're teenagers. And there are cases of female children developing it before they're a teenager or during the time of tweenage, aka ages 8 to 12. So that isn't to say that these numbers are absolutes, right? These are just averages. So averages are not absolutes, if you haven't heard from your math class already. I'm just here to also say that as well. Your math teacher, if they did tell you this, it's averages are not absolutes. It does not mean everybody, okay? There are plenty of exceptions to the rule, probably millions of people who are the exception to the rule, especially with large stats such as this one. You do got to take that into consideration. Typically 10 and 12 for male children and 14, 16 for female children. But again, that's not always the case. And I feel like for this particular character, it would say that his did start around that age, but not really. It's a really weird time. So ages 10 to 12 is when it kind of began, but not enough to officially say any kind of diagnosis. I would say that things started getting shifty and weird around that 13 and 14 years old mark, and then it went worse from there. I would say that's when things actually started shaking for this character. So we're going to keep that in mind. Again, we're going to have a part 2 to conduct disorder. Put a pin on that for now. In the United States, conduct disorder affects an estimated 2 to 10% of the pediatric population. So in other words, it is not that common for children to necessarily have conduct disorder. It's pretty rare for a kid to have it, though, to kid to have mental illnesses in general. The stats are small. I'm not sure, because in some cases it could be the fact that people do not want to be diagnosed. There's also the possibility that the stats are way higher than what we perceive it to be. It's just that we don't have enough people within the surveys and the studies and things of that nature. But for right now, we have 2 to 10%. So it's pretty rare. It's not a common occurrence for a kid to end up having this disorder. The chances of your child having this disorder is pretty low, but this character in a lot of ways is a special case for a lot of things. So I guess this is just another one of those things where it's like special cases, But yeah, that is the basics of conduct disorder. So now you kind of know what it is and you understand the general gist of it. We're going to take a break and then go into the next part, the fun stuff. So the symptoms, you get to see which one symptoms this character might have and just the general symptoms for the disorder, and explaining into even more detail kind of how it looks like and how it displays itself. And then we're going to pretty much talk about the risk factors and the types of severity. So in other words, we're going to establish the details. Now that you got the bare bones of what we're discussing today, we're going to take a break and then we're going to come back to establish the finer details in this kind of thing. I will see you guys right after the break.
You know something that everybody needs, neurodiverse and otherwise? A nice, comfortable place to sleep. Well, with Cozy Earth, they can provide that and so much more. With their comfortable bamboo sheet sets that provide cooling comfort and unparalleled softness, along with their very cute pajama sets that bring a cozy elegance to a night's in, it's sure to be the utmost, most luxurious sleep that you've ever had. For free shipping on orders over $50 and easy returns, you can get the utmost comfortable sleep with Cozy Earth. For more information, click on the link down below.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back from the break. Now, let's go on and continue our conversation, shall we? So, we first started to talk about essentially what conduct disorder even is, and essentially the basics around it. So now that we're back, we're going to talk about the more juicy stuff and discuss the symptoms, diagnosis criteria, risk factors, and how it also applies to Hisoka's character right about now. So let's get into it. Symptoms and diagnosis criteria for conduct disorder in the first place. So, in order to qualify for a diagnosis of conduct disorder, the patient must display at least 3 of the 15 specified symptoms. So there's 15, and you have to pretty much have only 3 to be qualified for conduct disorder, the diagnosis for it. So it also tends to be grouped into like 4 distinct categories. So that's another unique thing about like conduct and later ASPD. They tend to have a very specific way of classifying it, to the point, even though a lot of people don't tend to say this, it is another one of those disorders that would count as like it's a spectrum, right? There's varieties of severity for it. So that's honestly another good way that I can explain that. So furthermore, the patient must exhibit a consistent and ongoing pattern of behavior that therefore undermines the basic rights of others, as well as disregards the important societal norms and rules that are appropriate for that specific age. Again, that's why we talked about last time, why certain disorders aren't diagnosed until you're an adult, the personality ones most of the time, due to the fact that certain behaviors are just normal for development for a person. They're still learning that skill. It's not fully processed yet, so you can't really say such and such is this disorder, when it's like, no, they're just being a kid, and kids sometimes are, some people would say annoying. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but kids are still learning their environment, so that's why they tend to be given more grace. This pattern, continuing on, of behavior indicates a troubling level of conflict with societal expectations and the rights of peers. There are 4 symptom categories and their corresponding subsymptoms. So these are going to be the 4 categories and then subcategories that we're going to talk about. So the first category is aggression to people and or animals. Number 1 symptom is often bullies, threatens, or intimidates others. The second symptoms, which I believe Hisoka has, which is often initiates physical fights. It sounds like him. Yeah, definitely. That's why I highlighted it. It's my thing. It's like a lot of these are highlighted in my notes where it's like, sounds like him. If I say that, that's why. Number 2, or 3, I should say, has used a weapon that can cause some physical harm to others, i.g. a bat, brick, broken bottle, knife, gun, etc., etc. Sounds like him, so I highlighted it in pink as well. Number 4, has been physically cruel to people. Also sounds like him. One of the signs. Number 5, has been physically cruel to animals. Now, I have not seen this with this character, so therefore I did not highlight it. I'm not sure if he has it. I'm pretty sure the answer is no, though. Number 6, has stolen while confronting a victim, i.g. mugging, purse snatching, extortion, and armed robbery. As far as I'm aware, that has not happened within the story, so therefore that does not count for his character. Number 7, has forced someone into sexual activity. Okay, I'm going to say something real quick and controversial, even though it really shouldn't be. Despite what people would essentially say within the fandom, contrary to that belief, there's no concrete, I would argue, no evidence as to that happening at all. So I'm going to be one of the few people who says, first of all, that's a crazy headcanon for this character, and we're going to talk more about that later as to why that is a mischaracterization if I ever seen any. That isn't to say that I justify anything else. I said this best to a friend of mine, right? That, hey, I don't think, the villain or antagonist has to be like a predator of that kind of nature, right? Of a sexual nature. He is a bit salacious, but that's more so appetitive aggression, which we will talk about a lot later as to what appetitive aggression is. I feel like people tend to confuse that for sexual predation and things of that nature. It's not the same. It looks the same. It's not the same. That is to say that he's still violent. And I feel like that should be enough. Certain things it's like, no, there's no evidence for that. But honestly, does there need to be? I feel like a threat to essentially, for example, punch children, harm children physically in a violent manner is still bad. It's like, does it really matter? If sexual predation is not a part of his character, it's like, it doesn't need to be. I feel like the most scariest part of his character is the violence, like just physical violence. It's like, that should be enough. So I just want a little tidbit for that. We'll go into more detail as to that, because I do feel like that's the most confusing part of his character. And by no means is it a justification, right? I'm just saying that there's no evidence to sexual predation of that nature. Matter of fact, a lot of it is like trolling, which one could argue, it's like, why would somebody troll in that way? It's like, that's why we're talking about this diagnosis right now, right? One that aligns with ASPD. It's like, why would somebody piss off somebody in that kind of way? It's like, who makes these kinds of like jokes and dark humor, like extremely dark humor? It's like, we'll get into all of that and more aspects of trolling, which might also bring upon like the whole ASPD thing. We'll possibly talk about that in Unit 2 and 3. So the confusion of this specific portion, I do want to elaborate. It's one that I hope to do so in a respectful manner, but there's no evidence of him actually forcing anyone into sexual activity whatsoever. None. I'm sorry if that is one of the headcanon / theories that you believe in, but there's no actual proof of that. That isn't to say that, he's a character that should not be feared. The fear comes from the violence, the physical violence, for what I can see. Just wanted to make that clear, everybody. Yeah, sorry. I had to rain on the parade a little bit, but kind of have to, especially during childhood, there was no signs of that happening. But I would argue even teen and adulthood, there's no signs of that happening. It's something else. We'll get into what that is. You could debate whether that something else is still right or wrong, but it's not what people think it is. Number 2 category is the destruction of property. So, has deliberately engaged in fire settings with the intention of causing serious damage. Number 9, which has deliberately destroyed other people's property. As far as I'm aware, that has not happened for him specifically, so I did not count that as a potential symptom. Deceitfulness or theft. has broken into someone else's house, building, or car. Number 11, which is often lies to obtain goods or favors or to avoid obligations, i.e. conning others. Now, I did put this as one of the signs because, as we all know, his character is known for lying and pretty much conning people of that nature. It's like kind of being, a bit slimy, not necessarily like telling the truth all the time. So he has a lying habit. So I put that underneath that category. Continuing on, has stolen items of a non-trivial value without confronting a victim, i.e. shoplifting or forgery. I said that if it did happen in childhood, due to the fact it's for survival reasons, you also have to take other factors into account. If there is signs of theft within childhood, it's probably more so due to poverty, which we have discussed way earlier in this analysis, back in like the beginning episodes. So as far as I'm aware, I did not count that as a sign because there is a legitimate reason as for that. The reason for the shoplifting has to be to agitate people. The purpose is to kind of agitate others. It can't be for like survival reasons or anything of that nature. There is a certain thing, it's like, hey, is this due to poverty? Is it due to insert thing right here? If it's not with the intention of upsetting others, essentially it can't really count. So because of that, I counted that for at least childhood is like not counting. However, in unit 2, I think with shoplifting, there is a possibility, maybe a small one, that 1 or 2 times could have done this to like piss a certain adult off or piss adults off when he got older, so into teenage years. So I put that as like a potential thing that might have happened. However, there's not enough like evidence or clues to really indicate that as a strong thing. And again, it could be once or twice in which that might have occurred in teenhood to, again, intentionally agitate people. So we're going to put a pin on that and just see what further research that I could do for that. But for right now, it's like, let's just put a pin on it. It's a maybe. It's in my yellow category for now. There's also serious violations of rules. Often stays out at night despite parental prohibitions, beginning before 13 years old. Has run away from home overnight, at least twice while living in a parental or parental surrogate home, or once returning for a lengthy period. Now, during the beginning, again, we talked about kind of like running away after his mother's death. I think, again, due to the fact that's probably more so for survival reasons, it doesn't count. Like I said, the purpose has to be to intentionally agitate others. From what I can observe with this type of disorder, the intention is agitation. If it's not agitation, it's for survival or, let's say, escaping an abusive household. To me, and I'm pretty sure to a lot of psychologists or anybody who's diagnosing, psychiatrists, I should say, psychiatrist/psychologist, who's diagnosing, they wouldn't count it either. There is a certain thing that you have to look out for. Again, it's like, what are the other factors? Are there any other environmental factors? Do they come from this kind of environment? If so, it might not actually count. So that's just some of the other things to consider. Considering that we talked about like running away from home after his mom's death because there's nowhere really else for him to go, I don't count that as a result of conduct disorder. That's survival, so it's in a different category entirely. That's why I didn't highlight it in my notes. 15 is often truant from school, beginning before the age of 13. Even though I highlighted, like I said before, there's a different reason that we kind of established in an earlier episode as to why that might have been a thing. We talked a little bit about his Romani background and kind of everything surrounding that classification of people. So because of that, certain other factors apply here. So I'm not really sure if I could say it is something that's entirely his fault per se. His schooling is very similar to like a couple of other characters / people that I've analyzed. I call it like the Hamilton effect for a reason because, when I was doing my history project for Alexander Hamilton, the same kind of thing happened where it's like more so back and forth as far as schooling goes. It's very inconsistent. So it's like in the system, out the system, in the system, out the system kind of thing. It was very confusing. Not the only person in which I've done research to where that has happened. Same thing here. So with schooling and education as a whole, it's like it's back and forth. I cannot say 100% that would be conducive to a conduct disorder diagnosis. So that's why I left it in the yellow, I would say like light yellow category. It's like, maybe not even something to consider. And that's all the 15 symptoms that would count for conduct disorder. So there's certain other signs as well that you have to look out for. And these are the additional signs. So the additional signs is a lack of remorse/guilt, in which he does exhibit, especially later in the years. So this is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Does not feel bad or guilty when he or she does something wrong, except for remorse expressed only when caught or punished. I do think, again, due to the fact that his conduct disorder seems to be more so adolescent onset, this really starts appearing in his teen years. So callousness/lack of empathy, disregards and is unconcerned about the feelings of others. The individual is described as cold and uncaring. Once again, might affect him more in his teenhood, considering its adolescent onset. We have unconcerned about performance, does not show concern about poor performance at school, work, or in other important events. This individual does not put forth effort necessarily to perform well, even when expectations are clear, and typically blames others for his or her poor behavior. If anything, we've kind of talked about like his fiance and like workaholism and perfectionism for his fiance. For him, I would say they're two sides of the same coin. So in other words, not even opposites. In this case, kind of different from that original saying. I would argue that they are the same, just shown in different ways. Both perfectionists, both workaholics, just express vastly different. We'll talk more about that later. The point I'm trying to get at is this does not count for him at all. We've kind of talked about earlier when we were talking about him being a child performer, a bit earlier, of like working habits that was basically pushed onto him that I continue to see even throughout his character later on. So I would not say unconcerned. I would say very concerned, just in a vastly different way, which I will examine way later, like way down the line when we get to teenhood/adulthood. We'll put a pin on that, but just know, as far as unconcerned about performance, that does not happen for him, so therefore it does not count as an additional factor to consider. Now, shallow or deficit affect, however, this one might count. Not even might, it does count, again, just later on due to the fact this adolescent onset. So, does not express feelings or show emotion. I would argue for shallow or, deficit affect, it starts in his childhood. I did start seeing that within the pre-canon manga. It did start showing and appearing within his childhood. It's probably one of the first signs I saw, but there's another reason for that as well. Hopefully we'll touch upon that in the next episode. We talked about kind of like how that's possibly due to ADHD as well. For this, it's like possibly conduct or the startings of conducts, like maybe not fully there or enough to be considered for a diagnosis, but we're starting to see early signs. Another reason for that could be early avoidance. So we'll talk about that in the next episode. That's more so what we're going to talk about, hyper-independent/avoidance. We'll get more into that as to why he tends to be a bit more, or not even a bit, a lot more distant when it comes to other people. But that is something to consider. I would argue that this was the definitive sign due to a multitude of factors. So it's kind of like all combined. It's comorbid. So this is one of those things where it's like, it's a comorbidity. Does not affect or express feelings or show emotions to others, except in ways that seem shallow, insincere, or superficial. IG, actions contradict the emotions displayed, can turn emotions on or off quickly. When emotional expressiveness are used to gain, IG, emotions displayed to manipulate or intimidate others. This is probably one of the first signs that we've seen for his particular character. So therefore, it does count heavily. I would say, again, first sign. That to me, it's like, okay, this is what we're dealing with. There's also types of severity/risk factors. So we have severity number 1, which is mild. A few, if any, conduct problems in excess of those required to make a diagnosis are present, and conduct problems cause relatively minor harm to others, e.g. lying, truancy, staying out after dark without permission, other rule breaking. So in other words, it's like, it's pretty minor. I would say it's easier to fix and account for at a young age. These are the signs where it's like, it's there. If he does or she does, whoever has this diagnosis shows mild signs, it's like the ASPD probably won't be that bad. If it would exist at all, a lot of the mild cases, it tends to improve over time throughout age, and by the time it's adulthood, it's like even if some of the symptoms are present, it's no longer enough to count for a diagnosis. So pretty much they're in remission / quote unquote cured. I wouldn't say cured, especially with mental illnesses. It's a bit more complicated than that, but in remission is probably a better way of saying it. So we also have moderate, which is the number of conduct problems and effect on others are intermediate between specified in mild and those in severe. So what that translates to is that some symptoms are mild, some symptoms are severe. It's a kind of a mix of the two. So it's like in the middle. For his character, I would put his conduct in moderate. Now for ASPD, I'm going to later examine if it's still moderate. It's probably more into the moderate / severe category. And there's different types of ASPD as well. So we're going to talk more about that. I believe with ASPD, there's two kinds of categories. So we'll explain that when we get to his adulthood. For right now, for conduct disorder, he's in a moderate, which is some of the symptoms are mild, some of it's severe. It's kind of like a mix going on. So it really does depend on the situation at hand, but it tends to vary in severity. So IG stealing without confronting a victim, vandalism, maybe something like involving the lying that we talked about earlier. So the lying, the truancy, certain things like the physical cruelty and the violence might be another symptom where it's like, okay, that's pretty severe. Again, the main attribute for this specific character is the violence. That is the number one thing to look out for, being like, oh, it's the violence. Yeah, that's not good. Something is off about that kid. It's like, it's like, great kid, wonderful kid, very gifted, very smart, also very violent. If there was a school report, that would probably be the number one thing, where it's like, I would not piss him off. I mean, don't piss off people in general. I feel like that's a good rule of thumb to have. Don't agitate people. You never know how they're going to react. But if violence is the first approach, maybe definitely don't agitate said person. I don't know. Let's go to severe. So this is many conduct problems in excess of those required to make a diagnosis at present, or conduct problems cause considerable harm to others. That's why I said it's a mix of mild and severe. The severity or the severe symptoms heavily rely on the violence. Yeah, it's that. So, for example, for sex, we do not have any signs of that happening for this character. I'm sorry if that's what you believe in, which is the number one misunderstandings within this fandom. It's like, how did we get here? The violence is enough. Let's focus on that, because that's what's written. I'm sorry, that's what's written. I would say otherwise if it was otherwise written. And don't get me wrong, I'm a girly that loves subtext. We talk about subtext in this podcast. We go down, we go deep. That's what we do. However, there's certain things that I would have to say, it's like, that subtext just doesn't exist either. There's no indication. So, I don't know. I feel like that's the number one thing that we're going to keep highlighting throughout this entire analysis. We're going to talk more about that in teen / adulthood, but just for right now, does not exist. I'm sorry. Number 2, physical cruelty. So this does exist. Let's focus on the violence, because I feel like that's the actual problem with this character. The lying and the violence. Main 2 aspects, that should be enough. The trolling. Now again, I see where the confusion comes from for the first 4 sex or like adverse sex violations. I see where it comes from because of what we're going to talk about later, which is the trolling around it. It's like, who the flying fuck makes jokes about that? This character, apparently, we're going to talk about the aspects of that. No, it is not normal either. No, I'm not justifying that either. I'm not saying joking about said subject material or trolling people in that kind of way is appropriate either. It is not. But yeah, just letting you know that a lot of the times it is hard to decipher if this character is being serious or not. And we're going to talk about that with certain other analysis that we'll get into later. A lot of the times he's not being serious. And yes, that is a sick joke to make. Not funny. Or funny, depending on who you are. Someone out there could be like, this nigga gets me. Like, he has my sense of humor, which is like extremely dark. It's like, okay. Extremely dark humor. Some people have that. Whether or not you believe it's right or wrong, it's a thing, you know? It's out here, it's a thing. The trolling is probably another thing that we gotta talk about, but we'll do that later. The point is, a lot of the times when it comes to that, it's like, joking, I know it's something. Me personally, I would not joke like that. But for this character, it's like, I joke about it and I kind of don't care. Yeah. So, not a justification, but just letting you know that the confusion probably comes from that. Yeah. Physical cruelty. The number one thing we kind of have to look out for, the use of weapons, which again, we're probably more so categorizing to the physical cruelty aspect. It's the violence. It's the violence we got to look out for with this character. I said this to a friend before, but I'll say this to you guys. Yeah, I'm more worried about this particular character knocking your kids out. More than anything else. No, he will not violate your kids in a sexual manner. That's not likely to happen. But still be worried, because the chances of knocking out your kid if he gets the slightest bit angry is still high. Yeah. It's like being near a wild animal. No, I don't think said animal could do insert sexual crimes of any kind, but they could still kill you. So it's a lose-lose either way. There's a whole bear versus man argument, that kind of thing. And even though we're talking about a human being right now, it's like, I would still have the same caution that you would have for a wild animal. Yeah. It's just, no. Now, is it unlikely for man of any kind? Point is, it's the violence. Let's go back to the point. We're derailing. The point is the violence. The violence. One more time for the people in the back. The violence. I would be more worried about the potential of your kid getting chopped into pieces. That's still something to worry about. We don't need to add anything that's not actually there. However, I understand the confusion. Once again, let me elaborate. I understand where the confusion comes from because of his extreme sense of dark humor, which we will talk about. It is very extreme. That kind of trolling, it's like, it's not right at all. This isn't a justification. Let me make this very clear. Not a justification. But also, he did not do that shit. Sorry. I would say he did if he did. He did not do that shit. However, it's also okay to say that his specific kind of trolling is not okay. It's not. So, risk factors for Hisoka. Continuing onward. Let's continue this conversation. So now that we know symptoms, risk factors, all of that other stuff, let's get into the specific bread and butter for his character. Hisoka's upbringing paints a very vivid picture of a troubled past that is shaped by an unforgiving environment, which we have discussed earlier. So from a young age, he faced profound parental neglect, leaving him to navigate life's challenges largely on his own. The harsh reality of homelessness that subjected him to physical abuse, leaving emotional and psychological scars. As he moved on from one precarious situation to another, exposure to violence became an all too familiar aspect of his daily existence. The frequent changes in caregivers, especially following his mother's death, stripped him of any semblance of stability and nurturing that every child deserves. Additionally, the shadow of genetic influences from a father with a troubled history loomed over him, adding another layer of complexity to his development. Together, these elements formed a very turbulent backdrop against which Hisoka's character developed, deeply influencing his behavior and worldview. And we can finally start to see the first underlayers and kind of the belly of the conduct disorder and where it all started. So let's continue on with kind of the inferences and the theories that I have for his specific kind of conduct disorder. Now for Hisoka, the most likely influence seems to be both environmental and genetic. Environmentally, he exhibits signs indicative of early parental neglect from his father and physical hardships or abuse associated with homelessness following his mother's death. So we talked about the trauma of his mother's death. We kind of talked about homelessness and how that affected him as a child. We discussed that earlier in earlier episodes, so I won't go into heavy detail here, but these are all factors to take into consideration. From a genetic standpoint, it is plausible, now this is a theory, it's not proven at all, but it is plausible to hypothesize a familial vulnerability to neurodevelopmental and antisocial traits. For instance, there may be a risk for ADHD on his mother's side, and features of antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, traits on his father's side or similar predispositions. I've also done some earlier research as to the risk that comes with having parents with ASPD. They might be more likely to abandon their kids due to the symptoms of said disorder. So to say it's like, well, I see where it comes from, and that might be the reason he did, in fact, abandon the family. It could be due to mental illness reasons. Now, I can't confirm that's necessarily the case. Maybe there's another reason, but that is just a factor that might have existed. Can't really say 100%, but it's a possibility. Yeah, possibility could be like father, like son type situation. Some people, it's like they're doomed to repeat the sins of their parents. Some people, it's like, I don't want to be like that anymore. We'll see further down the line what might be the case. It could be a doom to repeat. Maybe not. It's like, we'll see. But for right now, the possibility is like kind of high due to the fact that if it is genetic predisposition, a lot of times with ASPD, it's paternal, so it comes from the dad side of the family anyway, so that's why I said that. With ADHD, I think throughout some research, it's more so maternal. However, there are cases of it coming from your dad and then you. There are also cases of that. Like I said, there's a lot of exceptions to the rule, millions of people in the exceptions category as well, so there's that being said and done. The ASPD, I do think, if I am right, and it comes from a genetic predisposition, probably came from his dad. Just throwing that out there. Throwing it out into the bushes. So, yeah. The symptoms likely developed gradually and may have initially appeared subclinical. So in other words, too small to count for a diagnosis. And therefore manifesting in smaller, lesser noticeable ways that, again, don't meet the criteria, don't meet the diagnosis. It's basically like, well, that doesn't count. So we won't count it in the books. It does not count at all. We'll keep watch of it, but for right now, you're safe. You're good to go. So that's what subclinical means. Early indicators could include a shallow or restricted emotional response, serving as a protective learned defense mechanism. In the context of chronic stress, if the intensity of these traits become more apparent following his confrontation with Marino, this moment could be viewed as a significant external trigger. So in other words, his fight with Marino and then finding out that Marino was pretty much the town murderer probably activated a lot of the symptoms slightly more. So at first it was subclinical when he was a child, right? When he first came in, when we first got introduced in the pre-canon to his character, it's like, there's certain things that might be off about the child, but we've talked about like certain other aspects to the ADHD and the comorbidity of this, like the conduct disorder, the combination. It's like the ADHD symptoms are a lot more present and apparent, so that's the number one thing to look out for. And also him being a gifted kid, it's something to take into consideration. So I took those into account first before I counted for conduct. The conduct, because it's more of an activation for some people. It's like since they were born. Some other people, if it's not since they were born, it's an activation process. So shaking up the Coke bottle that we talked about last time, this might be the Mentos in question. Kind of activates what would later be the explosion, or in other words, the more so apparent showing of said symptoms. It started off, at least from what I can see, after the whole finding out Meritno's a murderer and then fighting Meritno. It's like from then on there, it was spelled blood in the water. It had like ink on the paper. It was like, oh yeah, shit's about to go down now. It's like this is the official thing, the official thing. So that could have activated it. So in other words, made it even more apparent. It became like an acute stressor, a trigger. So therefore it exacerbated the existing traits and it brought it to the forefront. And that's how we slowly started to end up seeing the character that we do now. We'll talk about like the other establishments for the acute stressor, but the main one's like Meritno. Meeting that man, it's like has shifted something in the water, and we ended up with all of this. It was like a boiling point, you know what I mean? It's like you keep boiling the water, and eventually the water is spilling all over the place. So the first boil, right? It's like a slow boil. The bubbles start to appear, but it's not really enough to indicate like something wrong in the kitchen. I would say that first started out for him with like his mother's issues / his mother's death. That was a trauma. It was like, the hot water, it's getting a bit hotter. Still, nothing really to indicate something wrong in the case of conduct disorder. It's more so other things, other factors. So it's like this, it's getting hot. We're boiling something, it's getting hot, but it's not enough. Then after his mother's death, it's like, okay, now it's a unhoused child. I'm an unhoused, homeless child. I have nowhere else to go. No really other adults. Foster care system sucks. I don't want to be brought into that, so ran away from all that, ended up being homeless. Ending up having to force to provide for yourself as a young age. It's like another thing that starts making the pot hotter, but still not enough to indicate conduct disorder. It's something else, right? After that, it's like, okay, we got discovered. So now we're in the entertainment industry. We got discovered. That's cool. That's great. Meritno kind of discovered us. It's like now we're having this early job of being in the entertainment field, which comes with its own set of troubles that we've talked about. The water's getting hotter, but it's still not enough. Yeah? We keep going. It's like, okay, this is great stuff. Oh, my talent manager / guardian is the town murderer. Water starts getting a bit hotter. Okay, now it's getting to the point where it's like we're noticing the water is boiling. It's tipping a little bit. It's going off the seams. We're seeing the water fall into the stove again. It's looking a little bad. Still not enough though. The thing that set it off, the acute trigger in question, was that fight with Meritno. Yeah, it was the fight. It was like, yep, everything, the boiling pot has fallen off the seams. The lid is off. The water is everywhere. And now we're here. Okay, conduct disorder, finally. Or I shouldn't say finally because it's not a good thing. But conduct disorder appears. So yeah, that's how I could describe it with visuals. And you see how it formed slowly over time. It wasn't a quick thing. I do believe this was a very slow process, ladies, gentlemen, and MBs alike. So let's continue on with that, right? Hisoka's propensity for self-isolation constitutes a significant dimension. So again, we talked about like him tending to isolate himself with others. It started in childhood. I started to notice even within the pre-canon, it's like, it likes to keep to himself. You know, we talked about other aspects as to why that may be, but there's the self-isolation, and it constitutes this significant dimension of his psychological profile. So this aspect of his personality can be understood through the lens of conduct disorder, but also raise the possibilities of which we'll talk about later, which is hyperindependence as an influential factor. Hyperindependence, we're going to talk about this next time, but for right now, what you need to know is that hyperindependence may emerge as this coping mechanism developed in a response to perceived threats or unmanageable emotional experiences. This behavioral pattern not only affects Hisoka's relationships with other people, but it also provides insight into his social interactions and overall mental state. The subsequent section will explore the construct of hyperindependence in greater detail and examine in implications for Hisoka's character development and interpersonal dynamics. And that's what we're going to talk about next time. So for right now, we talked pretty much everything conduct disorder. So you got the basics down. You're going to understand in greater detail what it all means when I get to teenhood due to the fact it's adolescence. So there's going to be a part 2 in unit 2. So just keep your eyes peeled and open for that, because it's going to get even more exciting. But for right now, yeah, this is the early signs of conduct disorder for his character. And we're going to talk about it in the next episode. I'm so excited for it. Hyper-independence. See, that's another aspect to his like isolation and certain other things and certain other important aspects to his character, right? Being the lone wolf kind of thing. That more so is the hyper-independence and the avoidance, which we're going to talk about later on in our next 2 episodes. And it's going to be great things, do great things, we're going to have great things. But that is it for today's episode. Couple of things that I want to go through before we leave. Couple of housekeeping rules, right? Remember to pretty much like and subscribe for YouTube if you're watching. If you are watching on Spotify, like and follow. All the other social media platforms are pretty much the same. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, if you're listening on iHeartRadio, any other of the platforms in which this podcast is on, which is pretty much every single one, remember to just like and follow. You guys' likes and follows does great things for me. And the more council members we have, the more fun we're going to have. It's going to be great times, great vibes. We're going to have more things, beautiful things coming up when we have more people. Remember to also, if you want to, and later on, this is going to become a bit more apparent. If you want to support the podcast monetarily, you can go on either the Ko-fi or Patreon. Speaking of which, the series, after we discuss the 3 other episodes that are going to be later, what's going to be up and coming, I'm so excited for it again. We are going to be starting our Secession series. So Secession Monday will be on Patreon from now on. I kind of had an announcement before that, but I just want to establish again that that's exactly what's going to happen. And I'm so excited for what's to come with our new Patreon Secession Monday series. Some of the episodes already exist, but we're going to have just so much fun. It's going to be the best time, because the next episode, after we finish the Hisoka Unit 1, we're going to go straight into imperialism within the story of Hunter x Hunter. We're going to examine that and explore that, especially when it comes to secession and kind of the main central themes and points, and talking about imperialism and how it affects the story, especially within the Secession War plot. So we're going to discuss that and so much more. Again, remember to like and follow everywhere if you can. Your promotion of this podcast means the whole world to me. The fact that you guys support me is the greatest thing. I love it. love it, here for it, and so many other things. It's great stuff, guys. But I would say that our meeting has been adjourned, everyone. So I will see you guys next time, and have a great day with another Analysis with Ro podcast episode.